I'm Bill Shepard. You're listening to Gospel Tangents.
Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Mormons and most Christians worship on the first day of the week, Sunday. But Jews in the Bible often worshipped on the seventh day of the week, the Sabbath day. How do Strangites decide which day to worship on? We're going to find out in our next conversation with historian Bill Shepard. You won't want to miss it. We'll talk more about some of their other differences in belief with LDS worship practices. So it's going to be a very fun conversation. You won't want to miss it. Check out our conversation. I know Sabbath is a very important and different thing with Strangites.
Yeah, it is one of the more important beliefs that we were changed. Obviously, Strang would teach that the Sabbath was changed from the first day, from the seventh to the first day of the week by the mission of the Catholic Church. They did it through their power. They felt they had a right to make that change. Strang is going to teach that the Sabbath is really important to us, that we should keep the Sabbath in spirit and in unity and in studying and relaxation. It's not a crazy interpretation, meaning you've got to pray all day or like this, that you can feed your sheep if you have to, and things like that. But the idea was it's a day of rest and recharging, and
but it's the seventh day as opposed to the first day.
That's right.
Now, what I found really interesting from your book was Joseph Smith. The explanations why Joseph Smith didn't keep the seventh day as opposed to the first day. Can you talk about that?
I believe the interpretation is that Joseph Smith, in general, understood a number of things, such as the sonship. Strang is going to say that he understood this, or that he understood about the Sabbath. I believe it's in 43 in the history of the church. Joseph is going to say, some folks say I am a fallen prophet, but I say unto you that you are not able to understand the things that you have brought forth, and so forth. It was designated that Strang would bring forth this information in a little bit in the restoration of the Book of the Law.
Okay. So, is it? I'm trying to think how to say this. So Sabbath day it's a lot harder to worship on Saturday than Sunday. Are there allowances for that?
Oh yes, and it
because most of the Christian world does the first day of the week, Sunday.
And Strang is going to say that if it's impossible for you to keep the Sabbath day due to whatever, then you keep a day prior or after as the Sabbath.
Okay, so he was a little flexible with that.
Yes, and it wasn't realized, of course, that it was to be impossible for everybody. But the idea that that we have is that the Sabbath is such an important day, and it's a day of recharging as much as anything. But to keep it in with reverence and the realization that what it stands for.
Okay. And now I'm going to call it the sacrament. Do you call it the Eucharist?
Yes.
Okay, so you guys call it the Eucharist, we call it the sacrament. Another interesting thing that I thought was interesting was, I know the Utah Mormons, we pretty much use water exclusively. What do you guys use?
We basically use fresh fruit, squeezed orange juice,
oh wow,
grape juice.
As long as it's just some sort of a fruit juice.
Yes,
I guess wine's preferable, but just any sort of a fruit juice.
We never use wine.
Okay.
And I'm not. There's always been within our kind of silly, but thinking about that, Christ in the Bible drinks wine and so forth, but we just find it preferable to stay away from that because of the connotation of it being alcoholic.
Okay.
So
are you very strict followers of the word of wisdom then? It sounds like that's always been pretty important.
I'm sure we're not as strict. I'm sure we're not as strict as a group as the practicing Brighamites would be, and I say Brighamites favorably, because I think that it has been taught forever, by the since you're children up. So we.
Well, I know at John Whitmer Historical Association, especially, we talk about the Josephites are the Community of Christ, Brighamites are the Utah Church, Strangites are you guys, because we've got the same name, our church and your church, so we've got to distinguish them somehow. The Hedrikites, and so it's a kind of a common thing, and I'm sure some people might find Brighamites a little weird but that's very normal for this conference because we've got so many people from the Restoration
certainly.
Here. It's just kind of a convention.
Yeah, the Strangites. You have to understand how as Brighamites you would be, because Brighamites have the focal, they have the prophet. And so there's direction of the 12. There's directions that comes down, and you have a chain of command, and you have a way to initiate this and all this. But then think about having a small church headed by a few high priests that are not perfect. So it's harder to maintain doctrine. You know what I'm saying?
So coffee and tea, are those...
Yes.
I know in the Community of Christ they say, well, you just let it cool and then it's not a hot drink anymore.
Yeah. But in our history, we have had people that totally smoke and drink coffee or whatever, and so there is a reaction to that. All the Strangites realize that they should not smoke, they should not drink, and I don't think that's a problem. But Strangites should realize that the better you keep the word of wisdom, the better your health would be. So, and I think we do a pretty good job at it.
So you definitely keep is your Doctrine and Covenants the same as ours?
Yes. Well, it's just kind of funny that you have to realize that the major enemy to the Strangites has always been the Josephites.
More than the Brighamites.
Oh, yes.
That's interesting.
And that's true. So for some reason, we have always accepted used the Brighamite, D&C, and but with emphasis that there's some references at 130 or 131 about you must be plurally married, or
132.
Yeah, 132. So
you don't accept 132.
No,
okay.
No, not that.
You just cross that out.
No, and there's.
Well, what about when James? Because for a time you guys practiced polygamy, and I know it's gone away.
Yeah.
So 132 wasn't essential for that?
Well, more the idea that you have to. It doesn't, the idea that that's essential to obtain the highest degree of glory, or or like
Right.
that. So
Okay.
uh,
And you didn't have to worry about Official Declaration 2, which allows blacks to hold the priesthood.
yeah.
I
Oh, yeah.
believe that I want to say there was an early black church member, Ball. I can't remember his first name. That joined with the Strangites.
Yeah.
Joseph Ball.
I really wish that I should have written an article on the Strangites. You go through their newspapers at Boree, over 1,000 pages of just really good historical things, and the Strangites were basically New Englanders.
Mm-hmm.
They and they there are accounts of Negroes or black people, we prefer, obviously. So black ministers coming and preaching unto them. We have reference of at least a couple of men that were black people that were baptized and held priesthood.
So there was never a ban in your church?
No, there never was, and it's very favorable as you read through the Gospel Herald. There'll be a whole huge article on the Pearl, which I think was a slave ship that was, intercepted, or some blacks were killed. Mm-hmm. I can't remember. So there was a lot of if blacks would come around, certainly they were treated with respect and dignity.
Well, that's cool. Are there any
women?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, women? You talk about
Oh,
women.
yeah, women in priesthood.
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up.
James Strang taught that, in the early 1850s, before 1856 or so, but that women could hold the priesthood. So that has never been an issue for
the
us.
Aaronic priesthood.
Right. And we have, throughout this poor struggling church, throughout generation after generation, it has survived in a large part due to women teachers. Now, they do not believe that women hold the Melchizedek priesthood, but they are teachers. Now, in our church services, we in our Sabbath sessions, about every fourth time we will devote it where some of the women teachers can speak. So they have an active role in the church, and they always have. Rather enlightened.
So they can be deacons, teachers.
Well, basically teachers.
Just teacher. That's the main one.
Yes.
Okay. And then I read in there that I thought it was interesting. You had, I might be getting the number wrong, 3 degrees of deacons or 5 degrees of deacons or something like that.
And that would be under the kingdom,
Okay.
So what we have is just a straight deacon,
Okay,
so
yeah, I was curious about that because I wasn't sure. I was like, because I think there were
yeah, and that
3 or 5 deacons, 3
Yeah.
or 5 teachers, 3 or 5 priests, even high priests, even apostles. I think there were different degrees.
Yes. And that would be
interesting.
under the kingdom, where you would have different teachers, different degrees of teachers.
Viceroy or
Yes,
something
and
like
different.
that.
So once James is killed, then you have a church that is led, and I know we've said this before, strictly the highest authority is high priest, and it has been a rocky road. We've had a lot of schisms. We have had a lot of, oh goodness, it's just been a hard. And I should say that forever the church was scattered into Colorado and just other states, New Mexico and so forth. But in about 1948, there is in the Revelations of James Strang about Voree being a place of refuge and safety. So and probably Strangites would say the spirit went out and people started to come back to Voree or around the Burlington area. So Burlington is going to emerge as the principal settlement for the saints. There'll be some scattered throughout different states, but and it was rather remarkable that didn't stop infighting or anything like this, but and there was a turnover of people, but it was an evolutionary process to where at this point in time things are well. Quite a bit of property has been purchased and so forth, and is stable and a good place for the young people, and so. But again, we kind of look at we're Jethros, seriously, they're waiting for something better in the future.
Well, is there anything else you want to talk about as we conclude up here? Anything we've missed?
Oh, golly.
I'm sure there's a lot, but
yeah. Well, James Strang's teachings on forestry and conservation were really, really way ahead of themselves. Ahead of society and the need to. I don't know. Just recap that. Strangites believe in the Book of Mormon prophecies about the dispensations in the latter days. The dispensation of the fullness of times would be in two portions: Gentiles, Jews, and they believe that there will be two prophets in the opening portion of this dispensation to the Gentiles, a stick of Ephraim and a stick of Judah. And they believe that they are in an interregnum period, much like Jethro would have been. And they have a sacred duty to live as quality of lives as possible to maintain the priesthood that they have, and just put trust in the promises, I guess. So it's kind of at a good place right now.
Well, all right. Well, Bill Shepard, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me. This has been a real treat. I met you, about 5 years ago in Kirtland, and you're one of the kindest people I've ever met, I think. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and just let me kind of pose on, golly, as a historian, I've widely traveled in Utah. Met folks here today that know people I knew years ago at the archives at
and
BYU.
You're so generous with people. I know in that presentation this morning, people said, "Oh, well, thank you, Bill, for giving me this," and you're just a wonderful researcher.
Well, but anyway, there are my views of, and I've had such wonderful experiences with the RLDS / Community of Christ, and I would say that over the many years, just for what it's worth, I met a lot of wonderful people, but two people come to my mind as being around them. Diane and I went and stayed with them in Salt Lake for several days one time, and they are the most godly folks I've ever met as a couple. Bernard and Sherry Silver, just wonderful people. So anyway, for what they were, the Strangites believe that they have a special calling and a duty.
Cool. All right. Well, Bill Shepard, thank you so much for sitting down with me here on Gospel Tangents. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with historian Bill Shepard. Bill, it was a real treat to sit down with you, and I really appreciate you telling us more about your church. I just want to tell everybody out there, his book, James Strang, Teachings of a Mormon Prophet, is really hard to find on Amazon because it's out of print. When you do find it, it's often very expensive, although a lot of times you can get it at Benchmark Books. So if you're really interested in that, check with Kurt Bench at Benchmark Books, and you may be able to find it there. In our next conversation, I'm excited to introduce Cheryl Bruner. She's got a fantastic book on Masonry, and we're going to learn more about that in our next conversation.
The School of the Prophets, which met in the Kirtland Temple, had a lot of different Masonic elements to it. Just some of the temple architecture and some of the temple rituals had Masonic language.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe to patreon.com/gospeltangents, and for just $5 a month you can hear the entire interview without any interruption. If you'd like a paperback version of our transcripts, go to amazon.com and do a search for Gospel Tangents interview. Also, if you'd like to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website, and I'll be able to send you a transcript as soon as they are completed, and click the subscribe button. You can also find our latest information on facebook.com/gospeltangents, as well as we're on Twitter at Gospel Tangents. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. The link is at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents, and you can subscribe there. Also, please give us a 5-star review. If you want to support all of the podcasts as part of the Dialogue Podcast Network, go to lyceum.fm, that's lyceum.fm, and do a search for Dialogue Podcast Network or Gospel Tangents, because, that's a pretty cool one too. Thanks again for listening. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some of our great videos. Thanks again.